First of all, Walter, thank you so much for joining me to do this interview. I appreciate you taking your time.
Well, Quinn, it's great to be with you, and thanks for all you do.
Walter Isaacson is an American author, journalist, and professor. He has been the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute, a nonpartisan policy studies organization based in Washington, D.C., the chair and CEO of CNN and the editor of Time, and a lot more. Let me ask you my first question. You have a storied and expansive career from leading the Aspen Institute to teaching at Tulane University, to your time as a leader of CNN and Time Magazine, and your extensive career as an author. What are you most proud of in your career, and what memories are you most powerful for you?
I like being a storyteller, and I think storytellers can bind us together, whether it's storytelling about the news and explaining how it happens, and also about science or about technology. We live in a world that's very fractured. I know that my own role in this world is not as a major player. I'm not a Steve Jobs. I'm not a Jennifer Doudna. And I'm not the people I cover. But by telling the stories of the people that I cover, I hope I can inspire some people to become more useful or do things that help other people. And I hope I can do a little bit more to restore the civility and the understanding and the ability to have a kindness towards other people that usually comes from understanding how other people operate.
I wanted to ask you, have you heard of the grant study, the Harvard grant study?
Well, remind me.
Well, my father was a guinea pig of that
Right.
study.
No, I definitely know that study. I just didn't know what the name of it was. And I know that your father was in that Harvard study. Yes.
Back in 1942.
Right.
And in a way, I was reading parts of your book about the Codebreaker, and in a way, it kind of reminded me of my dad a little bit, saying that the Harvard grant study was almost a pre-CRISPR, because they were trying to find and what makes Superman, and wondering, well, should we do this to that person, or what if we did that to this person? And so in a lot of ways, I've always seen a little bit of a common denominator with the old-fashioned Harvard grant study and CRISPR.
One of the things that is interesting about that study and about CRISPR is we have to sort out and try to balance the relationship between our genes and our environment. Much of what we are is because we're predisposed genetically to be it, and much of what we are is because of our environment or what we do. And in my opinion, it also involves free will and the ability to people to take on their environment and overcome their challenges. So the Harvard study spends a lot of time trying to figure out personality, success, who gets to be a good leader. But I think that we should always be respectful of how beautiful and complex nature weaves together genetic determinants with environmental and personal determinants, and probably also with just chance.
I think we come out pretty good looking for the most part of just flesh and bones.
Yeah.
You put some meat on there.
Yeah.
And science can do a lot more, and I think we'll do a lot more in the future. But in your most recent book, The Codebreaker, you explore the life of Dr. Jennifer Doudna, a scientist who created CRISPR, a tool used to edit DNA. Can you talk a little bit more about the motivation behind this book and what others should know about it, and also what you've learned from it?
I think that the question of how we're going to edit our genes and hack our own evolution is a power that's been given to our species just recently. And after more than 1 billion years of evolution of life on this planet, one species has the ability to change its own genetic code. And that is a pretty powerful tool. It's like Prometheus snatching fire from the gods. We have to be careful of what we do. I wrote a book about the physics revolution in the first half of the 20th century with Einstein. Then I wrote about the digital revolution, which is the second half of the 20th century with Steve Jobs. And now I want to write a book about this revolution. I wanted to write a book about this revolution in the life sciences, which will dominate the first half of the 21st century. So I did it through Jennifer Doudna, who was among the scientists who invented this incredible genetic editing tool called CRISPR. I think it's important we understand how that tool works, that we understand what it can do, but we also then discuss the moral issues surrounding how would we edit our kids genetically if we had that power.
It's funny. I've always thought that Mother Nature, she's been editing us over centuries, over millions of years. And in a way, it's almost, I'm sure the question is already coming into argue and kind of probably becoming controversial. If Mother Nature can do it and we are part of Mother Nature, then why can't we as humans do it?
I definitely feel that that's a good argument, meaning when people say it's not natural, I say, well, every creature, large and small, in God's creation uses every trick in their playbook to try to survive, things from viruses to genetic disorders to diseases. And so we evolved to have both the talent and the temerity to be able to edit our own genes. So you can't just knock it away by saying it's unnatural. It's as natural as anything sharks do or butterflies do or viruses do. That's the way nature evolved species on this planet. I think that the question becomes not, is it natural, but is it wise? Is it good for the species? Is this moral for us to do certain things? And that's a judgment we have to make. We can't just say, let's not mess with Mother Nature. Otherwise, we wouldn't be getting the coronavirus vaccines and we wouldn't be doing all those other things we do to try to protect us from natural threats.
I think a lot of people forget that we are animals, we are species, we are Mother Nature. And all we're technically doing, I think, when we edit the human DNA is, we're just speeding up the process of evolution. And I think, it's a kind of a funny comparison, but now there's this new way where instead of if you're in the whiskey industry, do you want to sit and wait for your whiskey to age over, decades of time, or do you want to speed the process up a little bit? And now you can do that. So why not?
Yeah. Well, the question is, when you speed the process up, you're going in the right direction. It's perfectly natural that, we have evolved into a species that has this talent. But a lot of times, the way evolution works, a species has a new trait that comes along. And sometimes that new trait helps that species survive, helps it thrive. But sometimes that new trait can lead it into a path that's dangerous, that might even threaten the future of the species. Nature is fickle that way. Nature doesn't say, I'll only give you new traits that are good. So we have this new trait, this ability to edit our genes, and it could be a boon to our species. But a lot of new natural traits that species develop, it could lead us in a direction that's dangerous. The good thing about us humans is that nature and nature's God have endowed us with some thinking ability, analytic ability, some wisdom, so we can look at each of these new talents and tools that we have and say, where should we be careful and where should we be bold about using them?
You write in your book about germline editing. Um, in which the CRISPR technology is used to edit DNA in human embryos. Some have posed that this could enable parents to select out of certain traits, including disabilities. And then speaking of disabilities, I would also think syndromes as well. You can edit that out. So somebody like me with a syndrome, my child and hopefully their descendants won't have that syndrome. How has this book expanded on discussion of your own understanding of this issue?
Yes, I think that it's pretty non-controversial to use gene editing on a patient who gives consent, such as a patient who has sickle cell disorder. And we've already used it in the past year, CRISPR, to help fix that so a person with sickle cell gets healthy blood cells. So I don't think that causes much controversy. What causes some controversy and concern is what you described, which was germline editing, where you do it in reproductive cells like early stage embryos or sperm or egg, so that you're editing the children before they're born, and you're making edits that will be inherited by all of their children and descendants. In other words, you're editing the human species. And that's where you have to be particularly careful. Now, we're not there yet, but in the next few decades, we'll be able to edit our children not to have particular syndromes or to have particular disorders. And then we have to decide which ways do we want to go with that. I mean, as you know, and as this podcast describes, and as you've been so good at your whole life, you've described the certain syndromes that you had genetically, and how that forged your character, how that made you who you are. And so, before we say we want to eliminate any syndromes that might affect our children, you personally can think about it and say, how sure do I want to be that my children don't have the syndromes that I had? And you may say, I'm pretty sure. But you may also say, I kind of like the diversity of nature, and I think people with different genetic endowments all add to the beauty and the diversity of the human species.
Now, what about people like myself who are living with a syndrome? Can you edit that out, or will you be edit that out in the future?
It will not be easy to edit out syndromes that have multiple genetic causes or that tend to make it more likely. In other words, you have you're predispositions to having a certain condition because your genes predispose you to do that. At the moment, and for the foreseeable few years, it'll mainly be used for syndromes that are simple genetic mutations, such as sickle cell, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy. And in that case, the challenge is not simply editing the cells so they no longer have that genetic cause, but also delivering those edited cells to the right parts of the body. That's the hard thing. So with sickle cell, it's easy enough to do because you can do it with stem cells from the blood, edit them, and then reinsert those stem cells into the patient. And with blindness, it can sometimes be done because eye cells can be edited and inserted into the patient or left in the patient. But the delivery mechanism over the next 5 or 10 years, that will be the challenge, and it'll mainly restrict things to pretty simple genetic problems that affect cells that are easy for us to deal with, such as blood cells or eye cells. In other words, brain cells are going to be more difficult.
Lastly, what are you looking forward to mostly in a non-COVID world?
I do think that, as Plato and Aristotle both said, humans are a social animal. I think that when I look at what Steve Jobs did at Apple, it wasn't people working remotely and being on Zoom calls. He loved having big atriums in his buildings, whether it was Pixar or Apple, that people would bump into each other. Likewise, when Jennifer Doudna was figuring out how to do the gene editing tool called CRISPR, she went to a conference in Puerto Rico and met a biologist from Paris, and they hit it off, and they each had a different approach to the problem. So they decided to collaborate, and they won the Nobel Prize together, Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, last October. So I do think I'm very much looking forward to getting together with people in person. And I must say, now that I'm vaccinated, I'm doing that. I think those of us who have been vaccinated should loosen up a lot. And so almost every night in the past few weeks since I've been vaccinated, I've tried to make up for this year by having dinners with small groups of friends.
Now we can slowly start to hug each other again if we want.
I've been hugging for a few weeks now. My first question is, are you vaccinated? My second is, will you give me a hug?
Yes and yes.
All right. I wish I could do it. We can't do it through Zoom. This is
No.
why I'm going to have to get together with you soon.
All right, Walter. Thank you so much for your
And
time.
thank you for what you do, Quinn. You really do help people understand the world.
Well, you know, people like you and of course my father and my mother inspire me, and I can only live up to people like you. So,
And we can
again,
only try to live up to people like you. So thank you.
thank you so much, Walter. I appreciate everything. Good luck to you.
Good
And
luck.
I'll
Bye-bye.
see you soon so we can give each other that hug.
All righty.